Welcome, traveler of dreams. Tonight's Thanksgiving stories drift in like a cold draft under the door. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future horror stories like these. Also, let me know where you are watching from, so go ahead and leave a comment. Let's begin. I'd been behind the wheel for nearly 6 hours that night, pushing through the long stretch of highway as I tried to reach my brother's place before Thanksgiving morning. My rental sedan buzzed at higher speeds the way cheap compact cars do, and the coffee I'd brought along had slipped from warm to stale long before. The interstate was mostly abandoned, just darkness swallowing the road ahead, interrupted every now and then by a semi blasting past in the opposite lane. Close to midnight, the soft glow of a rest area sign shimmered against the trees, and I figured it would be smart to pull over, stretch, and splash some cold water on my face. When I opened my door, the chill hit me instantly, sharp and metallic, almost like the air carried a faint electrical charge. The place was practically silent. Only one battered pickup sat near the entrance, and across from me a pale utility van rested crookedly with its engine humming steadily. The overhead lamps flickered at uneven intervals, throwing long, thin shadows that crawled across the pavement in strange patterns. I remember thinking it was weird for someone to leave a van running this late, but maybe the driver was napping inside. I brushed off the thought, locked the car, and headed toward the restroom building. As I approached, the vending machines along the wall emitted an unsteady hum, one of those mechanical drones that almost mimic slow breathing if you listen long enough. I stretched my arms, rubbed my neck, and glanced at my phone, barely a single bar. That was when I heard it. Not a scream, not even a call for help, just a muffled sound, like someone trying to stifle their voice. It rose from beyond the fence where the tree line swallowed the dark. My first thought was that maybe somebody's pet had run off, or a couple had wandered out there to argue away from the lights. Then she appeared. A woman emerged barefoot from between the trees, her hair a tangled mess, wearing pajama bottoms and an oversized ash-colored hoodie slipping off one shoulder. She halted the second she noticed me. Her voice cracked when she spoke, rasping and uneven. "Don't look at me. Don't draw attention." I just stared, stunned, trying to make sense of what she meant. Her gaze kept snapping toward the white van, and for a moment I could have sworn something shifted behind the tinted window, just the faintest movement in the dim interior. She kept whispering urgently, insisting I stay quiet. I wanted to ask if she was injured or if someone was chasing her, but the terror in her eyes told me she didn't want anyone noticing her at all. The van's idle throb echoed across the empty lot, steady as a heartbeat. No one sat in the front seats, which made everything feel even stranger. I began stepping backward toward my car, trying to piece together what I was seeing, when she suddenly ducked behind one of the trash cans near the curb. "They'll notice us," she murmured, barely parting her lips. That word, they lodged itself in my mind like a sharp splinter. I turned just enough to look toward the van again. Its passenger door slowly cracked open with a metallic groan, deliberate and unnervingly slow. A sliver of dull interior light spilled onto the pavement, and I glimpsed shapes inside, one, maybe two silhouettes. They weren't speaking, they weren't moving much either. They simply sat there, angled toward me as if waiting. My pulse hammered beneath my skin. I forced myself to walk instead of run, doing everything I could to seem oblivious. Each footstep echoed across the empty rest stop, clattering through the cold quiet like noise in a cavern. Behind me, the van's engine revved. Soft, but enough to make every instinct in me buzz with alarm. I didn't turn around until I'd nearly reached my car. The woman still crouched behind the bin, now covering her mouth with her hand. I unlocked my door and slipped inside, hesitating for one short moment before starting the car. That was when the van's sliding door slammed open, the crash ringing through the still night as sharp and violent as metal striking metal. I didn't turn my head. I didn't want to see who or what climbed out. I floored the accelerator, tires screeching as I shot across the lot. My hands clamped the wheel too tightly, and the engine roared beneath me as I sped down the on-ramp and back onto the highway. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the van's headlights flash on. But they didn't follow, not at first. They just sat there, glowing faintly as the rest stop disappeared behind me. For the next hour, I kept checking the mirror, bracing to see those bright beams appear from the distance. The road remained empty the entire time. I didn't slow down. My GPS mentioned a state patrol station about 20 miles ahead, but I didn't wait that long before dialing 911. The dispatcher kept her voice calm, asking for the nearest mile marker, the van's details, and anything I could say about the woman. I told her everything. The bare feet, the panic in her eyes, the figure sitting still inside the running van. She paused for a few seconds before telling me they'd already received 2 similar calls that night, along that same stretch of highway. One of those calls had ended with a missing person file being opened. By the time I pulled into a bright, loud gas station off the next exit, my hands trembled as I held the phone against my ear. The fluorescent lights and noisy music felt surreal after the suffocating darkness I'd just fled. A trooper showed up within minutes and asked me to point out exactly where the rest area was located. When I mentioned the woman, something in his expression shifted, not shock, more like irritated concern. He said they'd been combing through that region for days. Several travelers had vanished over the past month, all last spotted somewhere between mile markers 2119 and 241. They took my statement and asked me to wait while more officers headed to search the site. Nearly an hour later, one of them came back. He didn't give much away, just said the van had vanished by the time they arrived, and the woman wasn't anywhere on the grounds. They had discovered fresh tire impressions leading onto a narrow dirt path behind the tree line, the kind of trail that wouldn't show up on any map. The officer told me to keep my doors locked if I planned to keep driving that night, then handed me a card with a case number printed on it. I reached my brother's house the next morning, far later than expected, and decided not to mention anything. I didn't sleep after that, and I've refused to take that route again since. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, I read an article about a trafficking operation moving across multiple states, using vans and staged breakdowns to target isolated rest stops. Authorities had made arrests near that very highway. The article didn't mention a woman without shoes wandering out of the trees. Even now, when I pull into rest areas, I find myself checking the edge of the forest, half expecting her to step out again, whispering for someone to notice her without being noticed. Thanksgiving week always worked under my skin. The interstate seemed endless, quiet except for the steady purr of my aging Crimson Vista and the rare sweep of headlights carving through the night. I'd left the office later than planned, hoping to dodge the holiday gridlock by heading straight to my folks' place in northern Missouri. A thermos of burnt coffee sat by my elbow, talk radio whispered in the background, and a torn-open bag of pretzels sagged on the passenger seat. Normally, drives like that helped me unwind, but that night the highway felt dense, like the pavement swallowed every bit of sound instead of sending it back. By the time midnight rolled in, the world outside my windshield had become a corridor of black timber and faint yellow paint. That's when I caught the faint pulse of hazard lights up ahead, steady, red, and strangely entrancing. A charcoal sedan leaned awkwardly across the shoulder as if one wheel had given out or the driver had misjudged the lane. I assumed they'd struck something or simply run their tank dry. I slowed without thinking, rolled the window down just enough to hear, and saw a lone figure beside the car gesturing stiffly in the stuttering glow. Nothing about it seemed staged at first, just someone freezing on a lonely road. I parked several yards behind, kept my engine humming, and reached for my flashlight in the glove box. The air outside was so cold it stung the inside of my nose. The man by the car, maybe mid-30s, called something out, but the wind swallowed his words. His voice carried a raw edge like speaking hurt. As I moved closer, my flashlight drifted along the bumper, and that's when I noticed another shape huddled low behind the sedan. At first, I assumed they were inspecting the tire, but the posture didn't add up. They weren't fixing anything, they were waiting. A bolt of instinct flared inside me before I could explain it away. I slowed down, angled the flashlight so I wouldn't give away how alert I suddenly felt. The man standing forced a small, awkward smile and said his battery died, though his tone sounded unnaturally rehearsed. The crouched figure didn't budge, only shifted enough for me to catch a muted glint near their hand. Metal? Maybe? Or maybe nothing at all. But the sight twisted something inside me. Every part of me urged a slow retreat, though turning my back too soon felt like a mistake. I offered a friendly laugh and mentioned I had jumper cables in my trunk, trying to sound casual as I worked out my next move. The man nodded too quickly and flicked a glance toward the crouched silhouette like he was waiting for direction. My headlights threw long shadows across the asphalt, and that's when I realized how isolated the stretch truly was. No ranch houses in the distance, no gas station glow, nothing but dark woods pressed up on either side. I lifted my trunk only halfway and pretended to rummage while keeping one eye on them. That was when the crouched figure rose. They were taller than I expected, hood pulled tight, and for a brief second they froze under the beam, weighing their options. That brief stillness snapped whatever hesitation lingered in me. I slammed the trunk shut, dove into the driver's seat, and hit the locks in one motion. The first man barked something harsh and unrecognizable as both of them rushed toward my car. My tires skidded on the gravel before gripping the pavement, and soon the hazard lights faded in the mirror. But then I saw movement in the red glow of my taillights. The sedan's headlights suddenly burst alive. They hadn't been stranded at all. My pulse pounded in sync with the road as I floored the accelerator. The sedan's lights ballooned behind me, closing in. Every bend in the highway felt like a dice roll. One misjudgment and I'd slide off into the trees. I had no signal, no way to call anyone. My only plan was to keep going until civilization appeared. Then I saw a green reflective marker flash past. Exit 32, 5 miles. I had no clue what town it led to, but options were running thin. They edged closer, high beams blasting my mirrors as they swerved across lanes, trying to pull up beside me. I clamped the wheels straight, hoping the road stayed mercifully smooth. At last I spotted a faint cluster of yellow lights up ahead, a rundown gas station and a diner. I veered across the lane, fighting to stay steady, and rocketed down the exit ramp at nearly 70. The car fishtailed but didn't flip. Behind me, the sedan overshot the exit entirely, sailing down the highway until it disappeared into the void. I drifted into the gas station lot and parked under the brightest light I could find. For a minute I stayed there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. The place looked half abandoned, the kind of station that claimed 24-hour service but barely meant it. A flickering sign buzzed overhead, and a faded blue pickup sat empty by the store entrance. I stepped out and scanned the highway, nothing but a far-off hum in the distance. My pulse thrashed, but the silence pressed even harder than the chase had. Inside, I tried explaining everything to the cashier, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19. He blinked slowly, like he wasn't sure if I was pulling a prank, until I pointed toward the dark stretch of road. He lifted the phone immediately and called the county sheriff. While waiting, I caught my reflection in the cooler glass. I looked washed out, older, like the night had scraped something off of me. When the deputy arrived, I gave him every detail, the staged breakdown, the crouched figure, the sudden headlights. He listened carefully, jotting notes, then told me something that made my stomach knot all over again. There had been 3 similar cases that week. People stopping to help stranded motorists along that same highway, only to be chased or robbed, and 1 car had already gone missing. The deputy offered to escort me to the next town so I could rest at a motel, and I agreed instantly. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every pair of headlights in my mirror sent a jolt through me. Even in the motel room, sleep refused to come. I kept the blinds cracked, the TV murmuring, and the keys within reach. When I finally drifted off near sunrise, I dreamed of blinking hazard lights pulsing in the dark, always inching closer, never fading. It's been years, but I avoid late-night drives whenever possible. Each Thanksgiving, my family teases me about slowing down in my old age, but they don't know the reason. Sometimes when I'm on an empty highway and a pair of lights flicker in the distance, my foot hesitates before hitting the gas. I think of the man waving me down and the shadow behind the car waiting for me to stop. Maybe they hit another highway. Maybe the sheriff's department caught them. Or maybe they're still out there waiting for someone else who's willing to be kind. I've spent most of my life fixing engines in a quiet little town about an hour from Fairhaven, and that Thanksgiving was supposed to be one of the rare peaceful days I'd get all season. My sister Marin had driven in with her husband and their 2 sons, and my mom insisted we host dinner at my place since I'd just finished giving the kitchen a full upgrade. The whole afternoon sat under a dull, wintry blanket of clouds, the kind of sky that refuses to brighten and just hangs pale and heavy above the rooftops. I remember feeling grateful to have everyone gathered in the same space again, the TV humming with football commentary, the scent of herbs and bread filling the air, and Marin nagging me because she thought I'd cut the loaf unevenly. Around 5, I started slicing into the turkey. It had been cooking since midday, coming out golden and flawless. The overhead light flickered once, a quick flash that made my mom joke about the bad spirits hiding in my new wiring. I laughed it off and kept carving. But then the lights dimmed again, this time deeper, shifting the entire room into an odd bluish tint before returning to normal. My nephew Jonah laughed and said the house looked like a scene from a scary movie. I didn't think much of it, though I remember glancing at the window and noticing how unnervingly still the world outside had become, as if the wind had suddenly stopped moving altogether. A few moments later, the smell in the room shifted. At first it was faint, just a trace of something chemical pushing through the cozy notes of butter and roasted meat. Then the smoke alarm gave a single chirp and fell silent, even though I could see a subtle haze beginning to rise. I turned toward the oven, only to spot smoke curling out from the seams of the door, dense gray, moving with purpose. Marin yelled, "Something's burning." I assumed some fat had splattered over the pan, nothing major, so I grabbed the oven mitts and pulled open the door. The blast that erupted wasn't a normal flare-up. Flames shot outward like they'd been waiting for oxygen, bursting with a force that roared loud enough to vibrate through the room. I staggered back, the mitts already smoldering at the edges. My mom shouted for everyone to get outside, and Jonah started crying. I rushed to the front door, pulling on the knob, but it didn't move, not even a click. I pulled again, harder. It wouldn't budge, as if someone had welded it shut. Behind me, fire crawled up the wall, and it hit me that this wasn't just kitchen grease catching flame. Something else had been ready to ignite. I filled a pot with water and hurled it at the base of the flames. It hissed weakly, barely denting the blaze. The fire climbed higher, feeding on some invisible accelerant. The air carried a sharp synthetic sting that burned my eyes. Marin was swinging a chair at the window, but the glass only splintered, instead of breaking through. My mom was on the phone with emergency services, reading off our address, but her voice felt tiny under the roar of burning wood. The ceiling began to darken, flakes of soot drifting down like black snow. I kept repeating in my head, "This can't be happening, not here." Then I noticed a different smell leaking from behind the stove. Sweet, almost syrupy, like gasoline blended with melting plastic. Peering through the waves of heat, I saw a smeared, glistening trail along the baseboard. Someone had poured accelerant there, letting it soak deep into the wood. My first reaction was disbelief. No one but me had been home all morning. I remembered locking the door after taking out the trash. The idea that someone had entered my house while I worked in the garage twisted something deep inside me. Marin finally shattered a side window with the fire poker, cutting her hand in the process. We shoved the kids through first, then my mom. The cold air outside hit them like ice, already clouded with thick smoke gushing out behind us. I remained in the kitchen long enough to reach for the fire extinguisher beneath the counter, but when I pulled the pin and pressed the handle, it coughed out half a stream of foam and then died completely. The needle pointed deep in the red. It felt like everything that could fail that night had chosen to do exactly that. I dropped it and realized I had seconds before the cabinets would erupt too. I squeezed through the broken window, landing hard on the frozen ground outside. Behind me, the curtains ignited and the living room filled with orange light. Neighbors rushed over carrying blankets and buckets, but the fire had already chewed up the roofline. I stood there in bare feet on the frosty pavement, watching the work of years collapse into one towering plume of smoke. Sirens wailed somewhere far away, but time felt warped, stretching each noise into something distant and distorted. By the time the fire crews arrived, half the house had already caved in. They kept yelling for me to step back, but I couldn't move. I stared at the spot behind the stove, knowing exactly what had been hidden there. Later, an officer told me the accelerant had soaked deep enough to act like a concealed fuse. Whoever had done it must have poured it hours before, waiting for the heat to activate it. The oven must have triggered the whole thing. I couldn't process it. Who would plan something like that? And why target me? The next morning, after the fire crews left, I walked through what remained. The air carried the sour scent of drenched ashes and burned metal. The kitchen walls were gone, leaving bare beams exposed all the way into the dining area. But the strangest discovery wasn't the destruction, it was what they pulled from behind the stove. A metal canister, empty, scorched black, wedged between the pipes as if placed with intention. The fire chief said it couldn't have accidentally ended up there. It had been hidden deliberately. The police asked who had keys to my place, and I listed the few names: Marin, my mom, and my ex, Elise. I hadn't spoken to Elise in months, not since our messy breakup over money she owed and never returned. When they contacted her, she swore she hadn't gone anywhere near my house. I wanted to believe her, but something about the placement of the canister told me the person responsible knew the layout well enough to plan it carefully. That thought clung to me long after the case went cold. 2 years have passed since then. The official report says the fire was caused by deliberate arson carried out by an unidentified individual. Insurance helped me rebuild part of the structure, but I sold the place as soon as I could. I couldn't stay there knowing someone had walked through my home, poured fuel behind my stove, and left my family and me to burn. Every Thanksgiving after that I cook somewhere else, usually at a friend's house. I don't even keep a real oven anymore, just a microwave and a habit of checking every lock twice before going to bed.